on, everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Stochastic NHL Strategy Show. I am your host, Josh Harris. Have a 4-game slate on tap. Could move to 3 games. There is, though, the fires going on out in LA right now. We haven't gotten an update other than Frank Saravelli saying basically nothing about it. We'll have to see if we get an update throughout the show. Like they should be hitting the ice for morning skate within the next few minutes. So hopefully there'll be clarity before the end of the show. I have a lot of family out there, and the Pacific Palisades are over 20 miles away from downtown. So I don't know, like from a geographical standpoint, I think they could play, but obviously there's outside factors and, families displaced and all that. So hopefully we get an update. We'll let you know if we do, obviously. So we have a nice 4-game slate here. Last night was 10 games, a little interesting there. I didn't cash because I left Stone off my Vegas stack, but it was a pretty interesting night. Like the Leafs had 14 shots on goal, but they scored 3 goals. Like the top line was involved in all the goals. Vasilevsky had a good night. Pittsburgh Columbus was a scene. So, nothing overly impressive out of the Discord. I know our pal Hit No Toad finished top 15 in the Daily Dollar?
Top 10.
Top 10. Yeah, he finished 7th in the Daily Dollar. 15x his money there. So one of the best finishes on the night there. Yeah, jamming Thomas Harley. Harley had a great night at 3,900. That Rangers game was a mess. You needed the Rangers top line, I think, to really do some damage. Jason Robertson had a good game. There wasn't like a slate-breaking performance anywhere, so, there's multiple paths to victory there. But if you didn't hit the nuts last night, the only way to hit the nuts tonight is to play, and that's why we're here. And helping me break it down, Slim Cliffy. What's going on?
Not a whole lot, yeah. Rangers top line did real well. I was frustrated I didn't play them. I ended up playing Edmonton. It just felt like a pretty good night to go to the Rangers. Like, it was honestly like 28 other teams except for Dallas. I probably would have played them, but ifs and buts, as they say. I watched that Edmonton-Boston game. It was kind of frustrating to watch, having stacked Edmonton. They, for like 45 minutes, they just ran Boston over. Like, it was like watching an all-star team play an AHL team. It wasn't even competitive. And then Boston, once Edmonton was up 3-0, kind of sitting back later in the third period, Boston started getting some shots. But like, that Bruins team just looked disheveled, to say the least. But yeah, the Rangers top line did pretty well. Jacob Trouba had a nice assist on Calgary's game-winning goal in overtime. Calgary, obviously, as long as that game plays, is on the board here again tonight. Interesting little 4-gamer that we have ahead of us, because there are 2 pretty good spots. One of them has a massive total with a concentrated top line, while the other has a big total with 3 lines that are all very playable. So it's an interesting slate to think about, an interesting slate to break down. Obviously, we're talking about Colorado and Los Angeles. Some news in Colorado that we'll get to. Obviously, there's potentially some pretty big injury news for Vancouver as well. So a lot and that's the thing about this is only 4 games. We'll get to Vancouver. Elias Pettersson may be back tonight. We'll get to Colorado and Chicago. Jonathan Drouin is out. We're still not entirely sure what the lineup is going to look like, other than the running 11-4-7 defensemen. Florida's going through their morning skate right now. You and I were talking before the show. Carter Verhaeghe was moved back up during the game to the second line in Florida's loss on Monday. And Aaron Ekblad is on the ice for morning skate. And obviously the situation in Los Angeles with Calgary and the Kings. So this is only 4 games. There's only 1 team on a back-to-back, and yet it feels like there are a lot of changes that could come in the next 5.5 hours, which makes it a pretty interesting slate when you think about, swapping before lock, late swap after lock, those types of things. So it's kind of an interesting slate, even if there are a couple of very obvious spots.
Yeah, and I just keep refreshing the list that we have for the Panthers. They just tweeted a picture of Kulikov and Bukestad catching up, so give us those lines. Yeah, this is an interesting 4-gamer for sure. Should probably get into it. Yeah, before we do, thank you guys for all your support through the affiliate signups, just being here. The viewership on these shows have gone way up compared to last year at this time. You guys are awesome, so we thank you. If you do want to go premium, you don't have to. These shows will always remain free. But if you do, you can click the link in the chat, use promo code Stochastic15, and they'll get you 15% off your first week or month. So, yeah. Let's get into the slate. Vancouver Canucks with a 2.6 total heading into Washington. The Capitals have a 3.3. Lots of news in this game that we don't know definitively. Elias Pettersson could be back tonight. The Cadbury Bunny for Washington said that there are a lot of illness and injuries going around his team right now. They are making some changes. The ones that we do know is that Vrana is out and Ivan Miroshnichenko's in. It also seems like Protas is going to be up on the top line with Ovechkin and Strome. If I had to guess if they're going to move Protas up, I would imagine they move McMichael back to wing with Wilson and Dubois. We just don't know for sure. That is just best guess. In any case, if Pettersson is back, right, I hope they leave Miller, Besser, Lekkery, Maki together, because currently in our current run, no one's playing them. 6% top 2 stack, 3.1% projected ownership. You get Miller and Besser on the top power play unit. They're only 14,900. There's no matchup that really, really concerns me coming back from Washington's side. Like we say it all the time, Washington is better because they've improved drastically offensively. Defensively, they're still not great. Yes, Logan Thompson, if he's in, is better than Charlie Lindgren, but if you're going to give me that top line at 3% on a 4-game slate, and they play a lot with Quinn Hughes on the road, I'm very interested in that. We'll have to see what the lines are if Pettersson does play. I would imagine Pettersson, Garland, DeBrusque could be the line. We have to wait and see. I'm just hoping they don't break up the Miller line. So that would be the line I'd be interested in. Like the Pettersson line, if he plays, doesn't interest me as much. Could be a low-owned combo, but no reason to do that if Miller and Besser are already coming in fairly low-owned. On the Washington side, we'll have to wait for definitive lines, but moving Protas up to that top line certainly will help them. He is a very good play driver. Strome and Ovechkin have struggled with Taylor Radish. Protas, it's a crazy sentence saying this now, but like Protas is so much better than Radish. Like last year when Protas was on the top line, be like, you can leave him off if you want. He's just the guy. But he really is kind of the straw that stirs the drink on that line. Strome's a good playmaker, don't get me wrong, but Ovechkin just kind of floats around trying to get his shots off. So I don't mind that top line if it is Protas up there. But my favorite line would be Wilson, Dubois, McMichael. If it is them, the issue is it's a little bit more expensive than with Protas there. There's already a lot of ownership on them, so they're going to be pretty heavily negatively leveraged. It is Lankinen in net. It's not, Demko is still recovering from an injury. So, Demko was pretty shaky against Montreal the other night. Wilson plays the most out of anybody pretty much on their team. he's the only one on the top power play unit, but I'm not stacking Washington tonight for the power play. Vancouver has a very good penalty kill, so I'm fine with 5-on-5 stacking. But if they're going to come in around 18% and the top line around 10, I'll probably just go to Ovechkin, Strome, Protas.
So I'm going to start on the Vancouver side. Generally speaking, I agree with you when it comes to the Canucks. Is like, even if Pettersson's back and he just goes to the second line, takes Suter's spot, plays with Garland and DeBrusk, I still just wouldn't have a ton of interest in that line. Like, Pettersson is just not having a good season. We've talked about it on a few shows, especially earlier in the year. He was injured in the final third of last season, played through it in the playoffs, didn't want to have surgery, tried to rehab it. He said straight up, like, he's had to do different types of off-season training and maintenance and those types of things. He is just not the same player that he was. I was looking at some of the data, like, his percentage of zone entries that he's carrying in is like 40%. It's like, that's abysmal for a guy that talented. Now, Vancouver's a team that doesn't mind the dump and chase. They're actually a team that does it a fair bit. But even Pettersson is usually pretty good at carrying the puck, and he's just not doing it this year. I would just have no interest in that line. It is Miller, Best, and Lekaramaki. Like, they don't have a big sample. Miller and Lekaramaki up to about 50 minutes together, 2.8 expected goals, 3.6 actual goals, shooting 13%. I think that's perfectly fine. I found it pretty notable that is 6 games without Pettersson in the lineup. JT Miller has 18 shots on goal. He's certainly been a lot more involved offensively without Pettersson, which is kind of funny considering all the off-ice and locker room talk that we've been seeing about those two. But that would be the line that I would have interest in. As you said, there's not much ownership coming in on them. It does concern me a little bit that they'd probably be going out against the Pierre-Luc Dubois line, like, just because, like, that has been by far the better defensive line out of the top 2 lines from Washington, but not enough to concern me. What concerns me more is that it would be Logan Thompson starting. Logan Thompson has just been a lot better than Charlie Lindgren this year. The Caps still have a pretty good penalty kill. It's not like the Vancouver power play has been the power play that we've seen in recent seasons. Miller, Besser, Lekaramaki is fine, especially where they're under 15K. If you want to avoid, like, the super chalk, like, Los Angeles lines that are in that price range, I think they're a fine pivot. There is Utah. We'll talk about that a little bit later. They're certainly in play. Like, they're a fine pivot if you don't want to play chalk Los Angeles. Going to be honest, I would almost rather just play chalk Los Angeles. Like, that's just kind of the way that I look at it. On the Washington side, now
we got an update, by the way. I don't know if you saw that.
Good
the
news.
Ownership kind of flipped. The Ovechkin line is almost double the Wilson line now. Just wanted to give you that before you broke it down.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. That also assumes McMichael's on the second line, which I'm not sold on, because there has been a lot of quotes from Carberry over the last week about them. Their entire plan since they drafted McMichael is to have him as a center, and they want him as a center on that third line because the third line just really has not been good this year. It's been the one glaring weakness that Washington has had, and he can actually kind of help stabilize it. Like, I'm not sure that it's not just flipping Protas and Radish, and all of a sudden Radish is playing with Dubois and Wilson, and that's like a checking line kind of. You know what I mean? So I guess we'll see when warmups come. Regardless of what happens, assuming Protas is with Strome and Ovechkin, that's the line I have interest in. You mentioned that new ownership, 15% ownership with Protas on the top line, 18% top 2 stack. We've talked about it. You just mentioned it about Protas. We've talked about it on shows. He is a much better player than he's been in recent seasons. He's a true dual threat, both can score and a really good playmaker. The Washington top line, when Protas is there against any other winger, shot attempts up 25%, expected goals up 16%. Like, he has been a difference maker for them. The other thing is they don't go out against top competition, which means avoiding JT Miller and avoiding a fair bit of Quinn Hughes. And if you look at Vancouver's numbers on the road this season, with Miller and Hughes on the ice, they haven't given up a goal against yet. With Miller and Hughes off the ice, expected goals against goes up like 80% or something like that, from an elite defensive number to about league average. So it's better matchups for that Washington line. Strowman and Ovechkin are obviously on the top power play unit. Protas is at a price point where you don't need a big game from him. You'd like to see him score a goal. If he gets an assist with like 3 shots, you're probably okay. I do really like Washington 1 here. And, the Washington power play is still generating quite a bit with Ovechkin back. That was the one thing before he got injured, is the power play really wasn't very good. With Chychrun and Karlsson there, when Ovechkin was out, the power play was really good. Since Ovechkin came back, it's been still really good. So while it's not a tremendous power play matchup, I would say that the Washington power play is probably better than the Vancouver penalty kill. So I really do like the Caps top line here of Ovechkin, Strome, Protas. If you're not playing Colorado, I think they should be at or near the top of your list for top lines to consider. If you want to go down to that Pierre-Luc Dubois-Wilson line, I think that's okay. They are coming in with a lot of ownership, assuming McMichael is there. If McMichael's not there, I'm assuming the ownership goes down. What I will shout out is that Eller, Miroshnichenko, whatever line that ends up being is basically the 4th line now, and that Dowd, Mangiapane, Duhaime line is kind of the 3rd line. Not that I'm running out to play Nick Dowd and Brandon Duhaime, but at least they'll play 13 to 15 minutes or whatever. And with Colorado being priced where they are with Drouin out, assuming Lehkonen top line, we'll get to that in a second, you're going to need cheap lines and cheap players. And I think, Dowd and Mangiapane, 3.8 expected goals, 68 shot attempts per 60 minutes in their time together this season. So I don't mind that Dowd line, or at least pieces of it. If you are playing Colorado, that's the only instance where I would consider them. Otherwise, this is a Washington 1 game.
Yeah, and we'll have to see what the lines are definitively at warm-ups, but it is one of the first games to lock, so you don't have to worry about that. Just went to go look for Colorado or Florida updates. We did not get any. Yay. Colorado Avalanche with a 3.8 total heading into Chicago. The Blackhawks have a 2.7. Drouin and Nishushkin are out tonight. Colorado's going 11-7. Best guess is Lehkonen up on the top line with Rantanen and McKinnon. But really, if they're going to go 11-7, it's kind of going to be like what Edmonton does. You'll see like when McDavid and Draisaitl just rotate through everybody to play maybe the most.
I think what you're going to see happen is the 4th line is just stapled to the bench, and it's a 3-line team for basically the entire game.
Yeah, and they play tomorrow.
And that 3rd line doesn't get much ice time as it is. Like, they'll get like 12, 14 minutes, and then the other 45 plus minutes is going to be shared between the top 2 lines.
Yeah, and they play tomorrow in Minnesota, but Jared Bednar just doesn't care. Like, if the game is close.
Yeah, this is not a team that's going to be like, you know what, we'll play McKinnon 18 minutes tonight because we have a big game tomorrow. That's not what they do.
Unless it's like 6-1 in the 3rd, McKinnon and Rantanen are going to play 23, 24 minutes tonight. And if they don't, because it's a blowout, they're obviously most likely heavily involved. I'm not exactly sure who takes Drouin's power play spot. It could be Lehkonen. It could be Colton. If Lehkonen is on the top line, they're 25,200, but they have a top 2 stack percentage of almost 60%, which is asinine. Now, if we get like definitive word that it is Colton on the top power play or something like that, which I don't think we'll get word either way, he's a bit cheaper than Lehkonen. He's $800 cheaper. That would make it 24-4. But again, like, without knowing, I would think, because I was going to guess it's going to be Lehkonen because before he lost the spot to Drouin, it was Lehkonen and not Colton. But again, like I don't know.
No, I'm just looking. Their first game after Christmas, Drouin was still out. They had Colton on the top power play unit with Middlestad and Lehkonen on the second unit. So that was with Nichushkin, though. So Middlestad takes Nichushkin. I think it might legitimately still be Colton.
Yeah, and I wonder if Middlestad even keeps it if they struggle in the beginning because he's had a rough season.
Yeah, but I mean, at least the power play's been good with him on it. So there's that. It's just the even strength play that has been terrible.
I don't even mind just going Rantanen, McKinnon, and Colton anyway to save. Oh, well, I guess we're seeing news that LA Calgary was postponed. I didn't see anything. It says, as of now, the Kings are proceeding as if tonight's home game against Calgary is on, but the possibility does exist that it could be shelved for now, given the disastrous fire event here in Los Angeles metro area.
No, Calgary beat writer Eric Francis. He's saying the game's postponed.
Flames team has just been told tonight's. Yeah, okay. Okay. 3-game slate now. So the ownership on Colorado is probably going to go up because LA was one of the chalkier spots. There was a lot of ownership on LA tonight. I'll just go through it really quick. And like the LA Fiala line was getting 17.7% projected. The Kempe line was getting 10.5% projected. And the Byfield line was getting almost 20% projected. So that's going to get reallocated across the board. I think a lot more people are just going to jam Colorado now. And then, maybe get some – obviously, you're going to have to put some cheap fillers around them. I mean – It doesn't really change what I would do with Colorado. Like, it's super expensive to get McKinnon, Rantanen, and Makar in there. I would do some sort of power play stack since it's 11-7. And I just need to talk about the Dickinson line for a minute. Like, it is a very small sample. But with Taylor Hall on that line, they have not been great defensively. So I do some sort of Colorado power play stack, build around that. I think I would obviously I'd anchor McKinnon and then go about that. Full stacking the second line, like I have no interest in doing that. It would just be power play built around McKinnon or bust. On the Blackhawks side, like I wish it wasn't Mikheyev on that top line. But I don't mind a Bedard Bertuzzi two-man. They have Colorado as a kid making his first NHL start. He had a .906 save percentage in the AHL this season. Travis Minor. I don't mind Bedard Bertuzzi two-man because they'll probably avoid, McKinnon and Rantanen. They're going to run into them because they play so much, but they're not going to go out against them. I'm fine with the Connor Bedard, Tyler Bertuzzi two-man. That's really about it on the Chicago side. This is obviously a Colorado power play game. It does suck that LA's off the slate now because the ownership is just going to be ridiculous.
Yeah. One thing I was looking at, because we always think about, do you play the two super expensive players together? We talk about that with, Edmonton, obviously, like Tampa Bay, so on and so on. I was looking at Rantanen has 13 games this season with at least 20 DK points. And in those 13 games, McKinnon also has at least 20 DK points in 6 of them. So it's like, it's not quite half, but it seems like there's a pretty reasonable chance that if Rantanen has a big game, McKinnon does too. And don't forget, there was a few weeks in there where Rantanen was down on the second line and they weren't playing together at even strength. But it feels like if I'm playing I agree with you. If I'm playing Colorado tonight, like I am building around McKinnon and Rantanen, Feel like you do have to kind of get those two guys, especially with the minutes that they're going to play. Like you said, with going 11-7, the fourth line, the guys from the fourth line aren't going to get much ice time. As it was, McKinnon had been skating like 24 to 25 minutes a game recently. Like these guys are going to play in the mid-20s unless it's a complete blowout fairly early on. So, I really do. Obviously, I really do like Colorado. There's a top line on the slate, all that stuff. The other thing is I was noticing Colorado's power play has been better with Casey Middlestat. That, like, Colorado's power play hadn't necessarily been the power play that we're used to seeing. I think injuries are definitely a part of that. Middlestat's kind of helped settle things down a bit, and they are producing a lot of goals on the power play again. And, Chicago has generally had a fine penalty kill, but they're starting to take more penalties. They're at 3 times shorthanded per game over the last 5 weeks. That's a lot. It's amongst the most in the league. I think it's second most on the slate behind Utah, or third behind Utah and Florida. Just the next game we'll talk about. Colorado is drawing a lot of power plays. Like, there are just a lot of reasons to play Colorado here tonight, and I do feel like there is going to be more ownership on them. Not necessarily because of that Byfield line, which was the highest owned line, but you couldn't play that Colorado stack with the Danault line or the Kopitar line. Now it's like there's an extra 25% ownership up for grabs. I agree with you. It feels like a lot of that is probably going to go to Colorado. I think in a lot of contests you're going to see McKinnon, Rantanen, Lehkonen all over 30%, if not higher.
McKinnon will be 50 plus.
I mean, yeah, McKinnon by himself is going to be 50% in some single entries. Like that's just what it is. So there is going to be a ton of ownership, and like, yes, obviously this is a really, really, really good matchup against Chicago. I'd also mention that Colorado's already lost to Chicago this year. You know what I mean? It's like it's far from a guarantee that this team has a big game against the Blackhawks. Like I said, they already lost 5-2 against them this year. Last year they lost, I think, once. They lost once. They only never scored more than 5 goals in any of the games. And considering the price of Colorado, probably want them to score 6, if not 7, unless they get in on all 5, which they probably will if they get there. I mean, I really do like Colorado 1. It's like whether you want to pay half your salary for what should be the chalkiest spot, by far the chalkiest spot on the slate. It's up to you. I think I will probably have Colorado players in my lineup. Whether I have a full Colorado stack, I haven't really decided yet. It is a good matchup. It's a good power play matchup. At 5-on-5, it's fine. I'm not super concerned about, with Jason Dickinson, Nick Foligno line, even if they are fine defensively. Colorado's just that much better offensively. So if you want to play Colorado, then just play them. Like, don't worry about ownership. Don't worry about anything like that. If you think it's a good enough spot to play them, then just play them. On the Chicago side, go ahead.
No, Jake just gave us an update with the postponement. Colorado 1 is now with a 65% top 2 stack and 32.6% projected ownership. So
here we go.
I mean, you're gonna see McKinnon 60 plus in single entry tonight. It just is what it is.
Yeah. So the question is what to do on the Chicago side. What I will say is that there are times when the Colorado top line, especially with Lehkonen there, wasn't necessarily that good defensively. They had 250 minutes with Lehkonen on the wing, Rantanen and McKinnon. 2.8 expected goals against, 2.9 actual goals against. That's below average defensively. And Colorado does have an AHL goalie starting tonight. It's not Mackenzie Blackwood. I'm looking at that Hall, Foligno, Jason Dickinson line. At the very least, Hall and Foligno together are up near 100 minutes with any center but Connor Bedard. 63 shot attempts, 2.6 expected goals, 3.1 actual goals per 60 minutes of 5-on-5. Like, at least those are above average offensive numbers. And I don't think I can explain just how hard it is to be an above average offensive line on this fucking shitty Chicago team. So, like, Hall and Foligno and Dickinson, like that line, especially where they're going to be matched up so often against McKinnon and them, are probably going to get a fair number of minutes. There's no top power play time, but Colorado's penalty kills generally been fine. They don't take a ton of penalties. Chicago doesn't draw a ton of power plays. Like, if you want to play Connor Bedard, like, go play Connor Bedard. I have no interest in playing a line with Ilya Mikheyev. It feels like Hall, Dickinson, and Foligno. Now, we usually don't like to stack lines that are in the same game that are going to be facing each other, but there are only so many options now that we're down to a 3-game slate. And it feels like Hall, Dickinson, and Foligno at 8,900 is one of those lines where if you are playing Colorado, and I wouldn't mind game stacking with that line. Other than that, like, if you want to go play Bedard, Bertuzzi, and Mikheyev, Bedard and Mikheyev up to 65 minutes together this season, 2 expected goals, 1.8 actual goals per 60 minutes, 58 shot attempts. Like this, I still don't get what's going on. But Chicago 3, we don't have much of a sample for, obviously, with Colton Dach there. You want a 1-off 2-vote Teravainen for power play or whatever, I think that's fine. But I'm going to be honest, I think the only Chicago line I really have interest in is Hall, Dickinson, and Foligno. And I think that should probably tell everybody exactly where we're at on this 3-game slate.
Yeah. It's kind of tough now because, like, well, I mean, it was tough before on a 4-gamer, but now realistically, luckily that Colorado's the early game, because if you fade them and they nuke, you can go to sleep. If you play them and they don't do well, you can go to sleep. Let's get to the late hammer now. It is Florida with a 3.1 total heading into Utah. The Soakers have a 2.9. We did not get lines from Florida. They did say that Mikkola and Ekblad are going to take warm-ups, and if they feel well, they're going to play. That's the news that we got from them. So basically, their game time decisions. Bobrovsky's in net. We didn't get lines. Now, it's important to note why we needed lines, because on this road trip, they've lost 4 of 6. And towards the end of last game, they moved Carter Verhaeghe back up to the second line with Bennett and Tkachuk and moved Luosterainen down. Cliffy and I are kind of in agreement. We think that's going to stick. We just don't know.
It's not just that they've lost 4 out of their last 6 games. It's that they've scored 9 goals in those last 6 games and been shut out twice. Like, at a certain point, even if the team is, quote, playing well and getting unlucky, the coach is going to start making line changes. Every coach does it.
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, Reinhart, Barkov, Rodriguez, 19,100, coming in at 8.5%. Now, it's a tough 5-on-5 matchup. It's not a great one. That Hayton Schmaltz Keller line has been great for seasons now. This season, they have a 340-minute sample, 2.39 expected goals against per 60 minutes, 1.9 actual. So, like, this is a tough 5-on-5 matchup. The issue is Utah just parades to the penalty box, and they don't have the best penalty kill. Barkov and Reinhart on the top power play unit, under 10% on this slate. If you're looking to get away from the massive chalk that Colorado's going to be, I think you start here because it's a great power play spot. I guess you could go to Washington at 18-something%, but I think I would take a stab here at the Florida power play. It's kind of hard to – it's the only late game, so it kind of sucks if you stick Ekblad in and he's out and you have to swap down to, like, Adam Bachquist. That would hurt the ego a little bit. But I think, if you're making multiple lineups, I think you take a stab with that top line and you have Ekblad in. And just hope they get, 4 or 5 power play chances. Under 10% on a 3-game slate, a top line I don't really care about the 5-on-5 matchup here. Just like I don't care that Colorado one's going up against the Dickinson line. Like, beggars can't be choosers on a 3-game slate. And if I'm going to fade Colorado, I think I'm starting with Florida 1. If Verhaeghe does stick on that second line, that's a bit interesting because that top line for Utah is very good defensively. The second line for Utah is fine, but 2.8 expected goals against per 62.2 actual in a 250-minute sample. That's a little bit more leaky than that top line. 2.8 is worse than league average, I think, by a little bit. I don't love that line because they don't play a ton of minutes, but, it's a better 5-on-5 matchup. You get at least Tkachuk on the top power play unit. If they do move Verhaeghe up, I would take a guess that maybe he returns to the power play. So I don't mind that second line, but I think I prefer the top line. On the Utah side, there's just a lot of ownership on that top line. And I think it's, obviously it's price driven, 14,300, 16.8% projected ownership. Like, whether you think the Panthers are playing well or not, that top line for Barkov still has been pretty good defensively this season. The thing is, like, the Utah line is just good. And Bob has been shaky. Mikla could be out. Ekblad could be out. If they're both out, that blue line's a little shaky. I don't mind taking a stab on Utah 1 here. Utah 2 coming in at 13.3%. Now you're getting cheaper. Now you can maybe fit them in with some sort of Colorado stack. I'm fine with them. Genther is the most important person to that power play. It's not a good power play matchup, though. So, but again, a 3-game slate. If they do get 2 power play opportunities, maybe they can snipe one. And I think Genther would be involved if that was the case. I'm fine with Utah 2. If you really need to get cheap, Kraus Bukestad 2-man, I guess is fine, but they are negatively leveraged. So, but again, it's a 3-game slate, so I wouldn't really cross anything out. I'm okay with it, especially if you're trying to jam Colorado. But, I think my favorite line in this game is Florida 1. If you want to leave off Rodriguez and add in, Tkachuk for a full power play stack, I think that is also in play as well. And you get a fairly low-owned, expensive combo that doesn't have Colorado, that if Colorado does fall flat on your face, you're already ahead of 50% of the field. So I don't mind taking a stab on some sort of Florida stack.
Yeah, I'll start on the Florida side. My assumption is that Carter Verhaeghe is going to be back on the second line. Even if he's not, 2 things. 1, he's on the top power play. So at the least, he gets correlation with the top guys. The other is like if Utah's up 1-0 after the first period or something, I think they move Verhaeghe up anyway. Yeah. So while he may not start the game on the top line, unless they just manhandle Utah early on, I think he does get moved up eventually. And even if he doesn't, you still get the power play correlation. That's notable because, as you mentioned, that Utah top line, great defensively. The rest, not so much. And the Florida second line, if Verhaeghe is there, they're at 3.3 goals per 60 minutes at 5-on-5. Tkachuk has been a little inconsistent this year, to say the least, but he does have 32 shots in his last 10 games. Utah does take a lot of penalties. The penalty kill is not that good. The reason why the penalty kill is succeeding is because they've been getting great goaltending, and you can't rely on great goaltending on the penalty kill all the time. So they're going to avoid the shutdown matchups. Verhaeghe and Tkachuk on the top power play unit. I was looking at individual player ownership. This is now a 3-game slate with 6 teams. One of those teams being the Chicago Blackhawks. And there is not a single player amongst the top 20 by ownership from Florida. The highest is like 24th, and it's Tkachuk at 13%. So if you don't want to pay up for super expensive Colorado tonight, this seems like a pretty good spot to go to get really low-owned players. And Florida's been struggling for the last couple of weeks. They're still a top 10 scoring team on the season on a per-minute basis. I really like the idea of playing Florida 2 here tonight. taking off Luostarinen, putting on Verhaeghe. Like, if you want to take out Bennett and put in Barkov or something and make it more of a power play stack, I think you can even do that. Or just flat out just power play stack them and then just go play some bargain basement players elsewhere in your lineup. I think that's fine, because this is probably now the best power play spot on the night. Florida against Utah. So I do like Florida 2 a lot. If you want to go play Florida 1, absolutely no issues there. For me, this is a Florida 2 game, and yeah, I would take out Luostarinen and put in Verhaeghe instead. On the Utah side, like, I know the top line has been good. You're still going out against Barkov and Reinhart. Yeah. Like, that feels like a pretty tough matchup. I would probably have more interest in Genther, Cooley, and McBain, just because the Florida second and third lines haven't been near as good defensively. You know, that Utah second line, 2.6 expected goals, 3.7 actual goals. You know, take or leave with McBain, but he does shoot a little bit. Dylan Genther, well, his shots on goal haven't been high recently. His shot attempts are sky high, like 24 per 60 minutes over his last 5 or 10 games. I forget what it is, but for a guy that is shooting the puck a lot generally this season, he's been shooting the puck even more recently. I hate stacking without Clayton Keller, so I'd be tempted to do like a Genther, Cooley, Keller stack. Because Florida's penalty kill is not what it was last year. And Florida is at 3.3 times shorthanded per 60 or per game over the last 5 weeks, which is amongst the most in the league, like just behind like Montreal, and I think like right in line with Utah. So Florida is taking a lot of penalties as well. Utah's power play has been riding really hot, but they've been good. So I think like a Genther, Cooley, Keller stack is kind of something that I would do rather than just 3-man stack the top line or 3-man stack the second line. Now, if you're looking for cheap players to go with Colorado, I honestly think it's Michelli, Stenlund, Kerfoot. Just because they've been getting decent ice time of late, you know what I mean? Part of it is because Stenlund does play the penalty kill, so that matters. But if you look at Utah's last 5 games, Krause, Bjugstad, and O'Brien, along with Michael Carcone when he's been playing, are the 3 least used forwards. Michelli's at 14 minutes, Stenlund's at 14.5, Kerfoot's at 15. So while they're designated as a 4th line, you might get 14 to 15 minutes out of Michelli, Stenlund, Kerfoot. And that line has not been that bad. Like, they've been better offensively than Bjugstad and Krause have for sure. So I think it's a decent chance to go to Michelli, Stenlund, Kerfoot, or some 2-man out of that if you're playing Colorado and need super cheap guys. Florida's depth is not good. Like, the 4th line especially is pretty bad. So you might get some good matchups for Michelli, Stenlund, and Kerfoot, like 2-man Michelli and Kerfoot, or Stenlund and Kerfoot, whatever you want to do to play with Colorado. If you're playing Colorado, I don't hate the idea of playing that Utah Kerfoot line. But I think in general, it would be some sort of power play stack on the Utah side. But the line I think I like best is Florida 2 and putting Verhaeghe in instead of Luostarinen.
Yeah. Interesting game. Now, we would have had another late game, but it got canceled. So let's talk about some defensemen here. Top of the board, we have Makar, Hughes, Carlson, Chychrun, Sergachev, Seth Jones. Makar's $9K. Like, that's really expensive. To do a Makar, Rantanen, and McKinnon stack, it's like almost $30,000. That's insane. I think if you're fading Colorado, you can one-off Makar. It's really hard to get him in with Colorado unless you're playing a bunch of Liam O'Briens tonight. Quinn Hughes, I like. It's an interesting spot because the goalie is better, but the team, still isn't great defensively. I think I'm good with Quinn Hughes. The Washington power play guys I like, especially Chychrun, because he just does not stop shooting. Like you said that the power play got better when Ovechkin got taken off. I think it goes hand in hand that Chychrun got put on because he just does not stop shooting. So Chychrun I'm fine with. Seth Jones, I'm okay with. If Ekblad's in, you're going to have to kind of gamble that he does play if you are doing some sort of Florida stack. I guess maybe you put Ekblad in with another cheap late forward, and if he's out, you can go to Bachquist and then jack up the forward. But I don't know, man. You better have some CSVs ready if you're MMAing. But I think Quinn Hughes, for me, is the most attainable, expensive guy.
Just a note on that Colorado stack. If you play McKinnon, Rantanen, and McCarr with middle stack, because middle stack's only 3,900, and now Vejmelka is the cheapest non-Chicago goalie on the board with that Calgary game canceled. You have 10,300 left for 4 roster spots. So basically,
min price.
Four near or min price guys, if you do that stack. So it is really hard to fit the expensive Colorado guys. I mean, McCarr is number 1 on my board. He's number 1 by stochastic projections. It's not actually even that close. I think it's nearly 3.5 points higher for McCarr than Hughes. So even though he's a lot more expensive, it's a better point per dollar value as well. What I will say as well is that the injury with Quinn Hughes is like a hand thing. That worries me for his shot volume. You know what I mean? So honestly, I think if I'm playing, there are 2 really expensive defensemen. If I'm playing one of them tonight, is McCarr, is kind of what I'm getting at. In the mid-price range, like, I think that's a lot more palatable. Devin Taves has really been hot for like a few weeks now. He's still only 4,200, or Devon Taves. Gustav Forsling and Aaron Ekblad are both playable in that matchup against Utah, but you have Jacob Chikrin, who, like you said, just doesn't stop shooting. You have Mikhail Sergachev, who's kind of in a sneaky decent power play spot here tonight. You have Seth Jones, who power play 1 and logs heavy minutes here. So I think there are some guys in that mid-price range where I don't think I have interest in Hughes. If you don't want to pay all the way up for McCarr, I think there are some guys in that like 4 to 6K range that are very playable here tonight. For the cheap guys, like Josh Manson's 3K, I think that's fine. Like Matt Roy for Washington is okay. Ian Cole from Utah, he blocks a lot of shots. Sometimes he can even donk you an assist, so I think he's fine. Mike Kesselring from Utah as well. He's the top projected defenseman, I believe, under 3K on Stochastic here tonight. Jordan Spence gets some secondary power play time. Or, sorry, I have Jordan Spence. He's not even playing anymore. Louis Crevier from Chicago had a lot of blocks in his last game. He's fine for under 3K. You know, now that Adam Bachfus is probably going to be off the power play, I think Ubas Balinskis, if you need a super cheap guy, 2,600, like he still gets like 17, 18 minutes, which is about all you can ask for. So I think he's fine from Florida. Not going to lie to you, I think I'm living more in that 3,500 to 6K range than I am the super cheap guys or the super expensive guys.
Yeah. Let's talk about some goalies. Thoughts on stacking against the goalie. This is like on short slates, I wouldn't hate it, but the problem is like I'm not putting in Mrazek against the Colorado stack. I guess if I were to do it, I'd have like Kachuk or Verhaeghe against Vejmelka. That's really probably the only option I would stack against here tonight. Like, it doesn't really make sense to have a Chicago stack against Minor. It doesn't really make sense to have Utah against Bob. You know, there just isn't like a massive shot volume team where you know your goalie is going to have a chance at the saves bonus. So I think on this slate, I'd only maybe have 1 or 2 skaters against Vejmelka if I was doing it. I don't know if you have a different opinion on it. I know you're not a huge stack against your goalie guy anyway, but
I mean, not usually. Like, I'll have a defenseman against a goalie or something like that, but I won't like put a 4-man stack him against my goalie. But like, it can work out because like if these are all low scoring games, right? Like Washington wins 3-1, Colorado wins 4-1, but you know, maybe Devin Taves gets 2 goals or something like that. Florida and Utah is a 3-2 game or something. Like, there are those kinds of situations where like maybe the best goalie scores only like 15 points anyway. So if you get like 9 points from your goalie and your stack goes off, like it's not that big of a deal. I generally don't do it on a slate this small. I think it's okay. But it's not one of those like, oh, I need to be different. I'm going to have to stack against my goalie tonight. It's just not something that I do personally.
Yeah. The goalies here tonight are Trent Miner at 8,400, Bob at 8,000, Logan Thompson 7,800, Lankin at 7,600, Vejmelka at 7,400, and Mrazek at 7K. I think if I'm gonna obviously have to choose a goalie, I think the three that I would consider here are Thompson, Lankinen, or Vejmelka. I guess Bob is fine. I don't think I'd spend up for Miner, and I don't think I'd punt Mrazek.
Yeah, I think for me it's Thompson or Vejmelka. Thompson's probably number one now that Darcy Kemper's out. I'm going to look at the stochastic projections real quick. Yeah, Logan Thompson would be the top projected goalie now that Darcy Kemper's out. Trent Miner is next. That's just because there's shutout equity against Chicago. I would go Thompson and then Vejmelka if you want to play Bobrovsky instead. I have no issues with that, but for me, this slate comes down to Thompson or Vejmelka.
We will be back tomorrow on a full slate. Who are you liking for your hat trick pick?
I had a guy from Los Angeles. Obviously, going to have to switch that now. I'm going to say he'll break out of his mini slump in a big way. Carter Verhaeghe.
I am going to go. I got to keep it spicy. It's a 3-game slate. I'm going Jacob Chikrin.
Sounds good.
Unfortunately, it was it got broken down to a 3-game slate while we're on the air, so it's going to be a wildly chalky slate. But good luck, everybody, tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Good luck tonight, everyone.